So thank you everyone for joining. For those of you who don't know me already, I've been teaching and researching the theoretical and practical components of MLD for nearly 25 years. And I'm still learning new things all the time. And I hope that after our interaction tonight, you'll feel that you've also learned something new, something interesting or eye-opening about the lymphatic system or the creation of MLD, or the physiological responses to MLD that really keep the VODA technique as the gold standard in this. And that's my main aim today, is to help you understand the underlying physiological basis, as well as some history. Have a look at the evolution of how we got here. Although the lymphatic system is vital to the health and survival of all body cells, it's only in the last few centuries that we've begun to understand why and how. And we're still learning all the time about the complex interactions with cardiovascular, immune and nervous systems. So let's go back as far as we can to the earliest recorded reference to a lymphatic structure. The earliest records come from ancient Egypt, where medical papyrus dating back to 1600 BC describes swollen lymph nodes. But this was likely copied from an even older source. So we know that human curiosity about the lymphatic system goes back at least 3,000 years, likely much longer. Fast forward to the classical era, spanning the last centuries before and the first few centuries after Christ. And we see Hippocrates, Aristotle and Galen all observing what they called glandular corpuscles and vessels carrying milky fluid, especially in the mesentery, that is the small intestine. These were early glimmers of what we now understand to be lymph and chyle. But centuries passed and discoveries were slow. Religious and cultural taboos restricted anatomical dissection, so much of the lymphatic system remained shrouded in mystery for the next few centuries. And it wasn't until the Renaissance that things began to shift again. In the 16th and 17th centuries, a growing acceptance of human dissection led to anatomical breakthroughs. And in 1622, Gaspar Eseli made a significant discovery: lacteals in the mesentery of dogs. These milky lymph vessels that we now call initial lymph vessels were soon also identified in humans. His legacy also includes his posthumous publication featuring something else groundbreaking, which is colour anatomical illustrations. And these red and black and white vessels clearly depict the close relationship between the blood and lymphatic vessels, and this was the first time that colour had been used in this way. In the 1780s then, Mascagni injected mercury into lymph vessels through his self-designed glass instrument while he was dissecting over 300 corpses. And this enabled him to publish beautiful diagrams in his illustrated masterpiece, which was published in French. And this depicted the entire lymphatic network in great detail. Then in the mid-20th century, Italian physiologist Mislin contributed to our understanding of lymph activity when he discovered the stretch receptor reflex that coordinates lymphangion contractions under load. Lymphangions are the tiny muscular segments that rhythmically push lymph forward. But we'll get on to more 20th century discoveries soon. First, we'll jump back to the last part of the 19th century and the Victorian era, when there was an explosion of medical research and experimentation on treatments of all kinds, including massage and treatments for swelling. In 1892, a German physician called Winnewater described massage methods such as petrissage, effleurage, and friction, recommending retrograde effleurage movements to promote resorption of fluid from swollen tissues. This image appeared in a later text by Riedmeier in an introduction to lymphatic massage. A few decades later, in the early part of the 20th century, Emil and Estrid Vodder were developing their unique technique, which they named manual lymph drainage. Emil Vodder was a versatile scholar with a background in art history, languages and biology. He studied but did not complete a medical degree due to an infection with malaria. Estrid was a naturopath, and together they developed and elaborated their method in France between 1932 and 1936. They viewed the human body as a whole biological unit and believed the lymphatic system was an omnipresent living environment essential to the life of all cells. Their philosophy centered on the idea that poor lymph flow was the root cause of many health and cosmetic issues, and they maintained that real beauty comes from within and is dependent on the constant renewal of the lymphatic milieu. It was while working in Caen in 1929, Emil Vodder intuitively massaged the hard, swollen cervical lymph nodes of someone with a chronic throat infection and skin issues, despite it really being a medical taboo at the time. The symptoms disappeared after several sessions of these gentle rotary movements, substantiating Vodder's hypothesis. From 1932 to 1936, the Vodders moved to Paris and studied the human body, refining their precise working method. They developed a sequence of circular movements using very light pressures, usually around 30 millimeters of mercury, to stimulate lymph flow without causing blood hyperemia. We'll come back to that. In 1936, they described this specific manipulation of the skin and underlying tissue, which they named MLD, and presented at a symposium in Paris. In the middle of the 20th century, with the advent of successful cancer therapy, they collaborated with other clinicians, such as Foldy, Leduc, and Asdonk, to establish what we still consider the core components of modern lymphedema management: skincare, exercise, manual lymph drainage, and compression therapy. Then in the 1970s and 80s, they began collaborating with the Whitlingers. And this led to the establishment of the Dr. Vodder Academy International and Dr. Vodder Schools International. And the Vodder's work brought great attention to what was once called the neglected child of medicine, emphasizing the critical role of the lymph vessels in fluid balance and waste removal. They were early proponents of the idea that a healthy lymph system is vital for immune defense, a concept later confirmed by researchers who discovered that lymphocytes produce antibodies. Their main hypothesis was that many diseases originate from the microedema in the connective tissue, and this is an idea that continues to be relevant in modern research. Their method has since been supported by scientific discovery, such as that of Professor Mislin and Hutchenreuters, and this work has confirmed that MLD stimulates the contractions of the lymphangions in the skin. The school has now grown to being, I'm sorry I haven't counted up how many teachers, but we're in multiple countries, and it is thanks to the Whitlingers Here you see my teachers, Hildegard Whitlinger and Robert Harris, who established a North American school in 1986. And whenever I'm teaching about the lymph system, I have this rich history in mind. I really am standing on the shoulders of those who've dedicated their lives to bringing this transformative modality to others. And not just bringing the modality, but maintaining it in its purest form. And this is a very important thing about the Dr. Votter technique, is that it really has not been adapted and yet continues to be the most effective modality for improving lymphatic function. One of the reasons that the Dr. Votter method has stood the test of time are the observable benefits that have been experienced by hundreds of thousands of people when they've received treatments from the thousands of Dr. Votter therapists over 90 years since it was first presented to us. But the techniques are also grounded in hard research, and the first physician researcher to put MLD to the test was Dr. Hutchenreuter, and he recorded and described this sympathicolytic effect of MLD. We might refer now more to autonomic balance, but Hutchenreuter's seminal work and the word that he made, sympathicolysis, has been used to describe and understand the physiological changes observed during MLD over decades. And that includes the Borborygmus sounds, something else which Hutchenreuter measured. And interestingly, he measured them not just in the recipient, but also in the therapist. So when we are receiving the benefit, we're receiving the benefit of MLD while we're performing it. Hutchenreuter also, very importantly, showed the effect of MLD on blood flow through the capillaries to differentiate this effect from compressive massage techniques which increase total filtrate at the capillary. Hutchenreuter showed that MLD actually decreases the total filtrate at the capillary and is therefore appropriate for use in edemas. And this has to do with the sympathicolytic effect and its effect on the smooth muscle sphincter just before the blood flows through the capillary bed. Hutchenreuter measured a 12% increase in blood velocity and importantly noted that there was no corresponding increase in capillary pressure and that this actually reduced the total filtrate. This is the opposite to compressive massage, in which the total capillary pressure is increased and therefore the total capillary filtrate is increased, and therefore massage is not appropriate in acute edemas. There have been many studies on MLD, and it can quite rightly claim to be one of the most studied manual therapies. Foldy did an interesting study to highlight the effect on immune function, showing that MLD reduces C-reactive protein. And this is an indication of total body inflammatory load, just something that we know is associated with everything from dementia to obesity. And this is very observable for us, that MLD reduces inflammation in the body generally. There have been several studies to replicate and extend Hutchenreuter's finding on autonomic tone and other interesting investigations on clearance of tissue molecules. And we've also got exciting new ways to image the lymph system. And Tan was one of the first to use ICG to image the effect of MLD on lymph flow. And for the non-Votter therapists on the meeting, just to highlight for you the main difference between MLD and lymphatic effleurage, and we can do this using toothpaste tubes and vacuum cleaners. So lymphatic effleurage is very effective in terms of moving lymph through the lymph vessels. It's like a toothpaste tube. If you put the pressure in the correct direction and there is an open pathway, lymph will move along the open pathway. This is most effective when performed frequently. It's very easy to learn, and so it's suitable for self-massage, and this is the main technique that we teach to clients. However, as a therapist, I want to do something that's a little bit more effective. I want a technique that is going to turn on the vacuum cleaner, because the lymph system is essentially a suction unit. It's constantly pumping, constantly moving lymph along. So if my treatment can increase the rate of pumping and the amount of fluid that is moved along, then that's a more effective treatment. And we also know from our clinical observation that after application of MLD, we have sustained and cumulative effects. But it's not easy to learn. We don't try and teach it to the clients. If you learn MLD, you do need to be prepared to develop a new fine motor skill, and that takes practice. The observed and measurable physiological effects of MLD are brought about by strict adherence to the principles of application, which include moving the skin, working with a light pressure, having a zero phase, working with the correct rhythms for the lymphatic system, and keeping a systemic overview in mind. Now, the VOD has said that you must work the whole system and then work the problem system. And people often misrepresent this to think that you need to do whole body MLD. No, they're talking about working systemically and keeping the whole body in mind in the way that you apply the technique. Moving the skin and tissue is done with a flat hand to engage and stretch the skin, usually in the direction and across of lymph flow as well as across the vessels. The circular path applies a shearing force across the line of drainage and maximally stimulates the stretch receptor reflex, resulting in an increased lymph pumping. The downward pressure is limited by the close relationship under the skin of the initial lymph plexus. We don't want to compress these small vessels, so instead the pressure phase is horizontal to the skin, and we use the natural properties of the collagen and elastin fibers under the skin to guide the exact path of this circle. Importantly, there is a zero phase where the smooth muscle in the lymphangion is allowed to reset and the vessel fills up before we initiate the next contraction. This also explains the relatively slow rate at which the techniques are performed. We're aiming for maximal activation of the stretch receptor reflex, which is about 27 to 30 times a minute. So we can't work faster than that. If we work too fast, we risk spasming the vessels closed. We're also working with repetitive movements, looking for a cumulative effect, working with the system as a whole so that we get a whole systemic effect, and this is part of our sustained effect. We know that MLD increases lymph pumping and that this is maintained well after the treatment over the whole body. There's a lot of research on MLD and lymphedema management, but not as much as I'd like to offer you on the results and effects in other body systems. But I do try and connect the dots as much as possible through the blog posts and the journal club meetings. And this paper is a lovely example of how other research can support our clinical observations. Here, although they didn't do it on humans, it was on rats, they clearly showed that gently stretching a healing inflammatory wound makes it heal faster. We get better resolution of the wound site with gentle stretching and shearing forces in the tissue. So it's not too much of a leap to understand that this could also be the same mechanism that we observe when we see how much MLD improves and speeds up wound healing. And this meets very well with our years and years of observation, where when we do MLD, chronic wounds start to heal better. When we use MLD with acute wounds, they heal faster than we normally expect them. And so research papers like this can kind of help us to connect the dots with what might be happening when we do MLD, even though we don't have the research on that specifically. So that's the Talking Lymph Live page there. You can see that I write a new paper each month, a new blog post each month. I'm always looking for topics. If you've got a particular topic that you'd like me to research and write on, I'm happy to do that. So that talking lymph page is available just on the Moving Lymph website. Then we've got the Moving Lymph Online. And so we've got things like our Lymphology Journal Club. So each month we take a paper, we look at what was done, the methodology, the validity of the results, the clinical relevance of the results. And the real aim is to increase academic literacy amongst lymphatic therapists, because some of us are really fabulous therapists but wouldn't know how to read a research paper to save our lives. So this is the idea that you don't have to just accept the conclusions of the author. You can actually look at the paper and make your own decisions about, you know, how relevant the study is to your own therapy. So in summary, MLD and massage have different mechanisms of action, and this accounts for that important difference in capillary filtrate, which does happen in massage and which doesn't happen in MLD. Think of MLD as a non-invasive, evidence-based approach that promotes wellness, total wellness in the system. It's not just about the lymphatic system. We've got those very powerful autonomic balancing effects that have been shown multiple times in research. And we've got other responses in other organ systems as well. We've got physiological changes in the connective tissue, which are really important. I haven't had time to go into those yet. And some of the research that has been done really indicates that MLD is very effective in managing stress and in pain reduction, improving visceral functions like constipation and things like that, and also supporting immune activity. That is my presentation.